There we go. Awesome. Thank you for being here, Ez. I'm super excited. You are the first guest on my podcast. Oh no, that's not true.
Really?
I had Jill before. That's true. I shouldn't say that. But you're my first like real guest. No offense to Jill.
I'm a real guest.
Yeah, she doesn't listen to the podcast, so it's okay. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, and I'm really excited to talk with you today. For those of you that don't know yet, we're coming out with the Boudoir University, which is like a little brain noodle I had last summer, and Ez is one of our esteemed educators for 2 courses, which is super exciting. So I've had the pleasure of listening to your voice quite a lot over the last few months as I've like put these things together. And I'm not gonna lie, I learned a lot from your course material from the one that I've received so far, and it was really eye-opening to me. So I want to thank you for the effort that you put into that, like you do with everything. You put a lot of emotional labor into the work that you do. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your project, the I Woke Up Like This. It started as a project. Is that correct?
Yes, it started in 2014, somewhere around the, I can't remember if it was 2013 that I started doing that or 2014, but the project just blew up overnight, and it really spoke to me in a lot of ways that changed who I was as a person. So obviously, after doing it for so long, I figured, fine art, nude photography is very close to boudoir.
Yep.
So I naturally fell into that category, and I've been doing it ever since under the name I Woke Up Like This.
That's fantastic. So what was kind of the impetus to start the project to begin with? Like what kind of made you be like, "Hey, I want to take pictures of naked humans in the morning," kind of thing?
Yeah, it's sort of like a particular setup. I have my system where like I shoot like at like right after they've woken up in the state that they wake up in. And I make sure that they don't put on makeup the night before, like some tried to do.
And you're like, "No, take that off."
I was like, oh no, because I let one slide through, and the critics came.
Oh, really?
The other people were really invested in the process of how each session was getting done, and like how strict I was about like not doing anything to alter yourself for
Yeah.
society. So it started because I had a friend who I took nude portraits of. She was the first person I ever did a nude portrait of. And we were roommates at the time, and she just came into my room. We took some of the direct sunlight coming in through the window and just illuminated her midsection. And it was such a beautiful photograph of like her, and she's like, I haven't even showered yet. I haven't even brushed my hair. Like, I don't want to take a picture. And I was like, I don't care. Get over here. So we ended up doing that portrait, and her response to it is what made me want to do more, because
Amazing.
she wasn't happy. She
Okay.
was very, very critical of herself. And she said, my boobs they're too long and they're too saggy, and my belly has stretch marks on it, and I'm fat, and not in the empowering way, but in the I hate myself type of way. And it just really tore me down, because like she had been one of those figures, those bigger bodies in my life that had taught me to love myself no matter what size I was. So in that effort, I decided I was going to research this phenomenon a little bit and do these interviews with each person I photographed. And I would measure their self-esteem going into these sessions and coming out, so that I could gauge like just how much the experience in itself would impact the way they viewed themselves in the moment.
Wow. So when she yeah, it can be hard as a photographer when you're like, "Oh my god, this is the most beautiful photo I've ever taken." And then the person in the photo's like, I'm not a fan of the way I look in the photo." We're
Right.
like,
They
"What?"
struggle.
So what is your kind of process then for the afterwards when they disclose to you that, "Oh, that makes me uncomfortable to see myself like that." Do you just sit with them kind of in that feeling, or do you offer them advice, or what kind of is your process afterwards?
I've done nearly 60 women, and at this point, like there have been a couple of them that have come out with a negative self-esteem experience, and usually it comes down to their own stage of grief with their body, like grieving over the loss of control that we perceive ourselves to have over our bodies. Like, it's taken away when you see yourself in that state.
Yeah.
And it can be overpowering for some people, and in that moment I just explained to them, like, what you're feeling is a little bit of shock right now, and I want you to sit with that feeling and really validate it, but I want you to also push yourself forward towards accepting bare minimally what you look like in these photographs, because this is you and it's not going to change. And even if it does change, you still have to figure out how to love that changed version of yourself.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I think that's something that a lot of photographers struggle with when clients don't like their photos of themselves. Is they're like, I don't know what to say. Like, what do I do with them? And I think the point of validating their emotions are okay is really important, and not just to gloss over with like, no, you're beautiful, you look amazing. Like, because that doesn't really help. That makes them feel almost a second amount of shame, because now they don't just feel bad about their body, they feel bad about feeling bad about their body.
Right.
And
They feel shame about their shame about their shame.
yeah, exactly. It's just like this big
I'm like
spiral.
a very big, like, in my studio, like, shame is like banned from my studio. We're not allowed to be like, we're allowed to be like ashamed of ourselves, but I disagree and reiterate and rephrase, as I've been taught in cognitive behavioral therapy, to take like the assertion about yourself and rephrase it into something a little bit more productive towards the journey of self-love.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Reframing is such an important technique for people to learn and utilize. But yeah, so I think that's awesome that you're also able to take from your own experience then of cognitive behavioral therapy and say, how can this information help my clients? Because I do a similar thing with the positive psychology stuff that I've learned is like, oh, you know what? This is not just going to benefit me. This is literally going to help out clients to understand a bit more why they feel the way that they do, and maybe different ways
Right.
of thinking about it without telling them how to think, but rather saying, is there a way we can think about this differently? And offering different perspectives or point of views that maybe they never had. So, yeah, I have to tell you, when you sent me your gallery of images, I was like, oh, yeah, because I needed some for the website and stuff. And I was like, oh, yeah, these are going to be beautiful. And I was like, oh my God, these are
Mhm.
stunning. Like, I was like, I want Ez to photograph me. Like, this is happening. Like,
Woo!
I want you
Love
to
that.
I want to see how you see my body. Like, I think that's the cool gift that we as photographers have, is we understand that, like, this is just the way I see you in this moment, the way I see the light on you in this moment. Like, we can kind of remove ourselves, some of us can, from
Right.
that. So, like, for me, it's really exciting to see how other people would see me, and remove the personal piece from that, if that makes sense. So it's like,
Mhm.
just because that's how you see me, which is probably the most natural way that I've seen people photographed, FYI, like the work that you
Oh,
do.
well, thank you.
That's why, like, it's beautiful. So I'll share a link in the podcast information, so people, you can go check out as his website to get that information and see all the beautiful images there. But yeah, I was like, you're gonna photograph my belly one day, so it's gonna happen.
Yay.
Yeah, so thank you for that beauty that you do. So let's talk a little bit about your advocacy work. That's why I call it, or activism work. What would you say that what do you call yourself that way?
I like to stick with advocacy right now. Activism is a little more. Actually, you know what? I could call myself either. It doesn't really matter to me at this point. As educator slash advocacy is around the terms I like to use.
Yeah, so when, because the photography industry is very much built on Eurocentric beauty standards, and we have seen this over the last, and being in Facebook groups definitely compounds this information. Like, seeing the same Right? Like seeing the same bodies shared all the time, and whatnot. It can be disheartening sometimes to be like, yes, that is some of the bodies that exist, but like, where are these other bodies? So, what for you kind of made you start to kind of speak up, I guess, about your experiences, and now you offer mentoring and things like that to photographers around like how they could be more inclusive? Like, what was it for you? What did you recognize in the industry that you're like, they need help?
Well, I guess it was about the time that Ferguson happened. I started realizing a lot of my own privileges and seeing just how little I really knew as someone who used to think that they knew everything. So,
I feel that.
young 20s me was very ego filled, and that broke very quickly once all of that stuff, Black Lives Matter, started to really like become a pervasive force in the movement towards equality for people of color, but specifically Black lives.
Yeah.
But that drove me to the intersection of race, and my project actually drew me towards the intersection of fatness. And from there, it just sort of increased over time. Over the last like 7-8 years or so, I've just gradually educated myself about each intersection, from intersectional activism, which is what I practice. And from there, I just realized as a photographer who runs a photography business, who is also doing all this work, I realized our entire community was absent of this knowledge. There was nobody doing anything with ableism 10 years ago. There was nobody doing anything with race before all of these events in the relatively close future, like present, have happened.
Yeah.
So it just sort of dawned on me that, like, I'm not a race educator, but like, I will always advocate that everybody educate themselves on that before they tackle other intersections, because it is the most useful intersection to be like fluent in. Not that I consider myself fluent. I think that's a lifelong journey.
Agreed.
But when it comes to ableism, and when it comes to transphobia, and when it comes to Eurocentric beauty ideals, our boudoir community is very centered on those things. And just by participating in groups and stuff, like, my work isn't for the average boudoir photographer. Fine art photographers love it, but the average, like, sexy, like, dolled up, lust-filled, branding doesn't really like my work. So I'll be posting in these groups filled with those people and filled with white, thin bodies, and I just find myself like getting like crickets. And it says volumes about the communities that I put my work out into.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. Similarly, like my biggest work has been around just showcasing fat bodies, because that is the one intersection that I exist at. So that is something that, like, in 2014, I think it was, I like looked around at the photography industry and was like, hey, where are all the fat people? Like, I'm like, where are people that look like me? Like, they're not here, but we exist. Like, why don't we have photos? Like, I don't.
Photographers out there who are fat and who could be taking beautiful selfies of themselves and contributing to the lack of bodies that they get when they're commercial. Because honestly, like, we also need to talk about the problem where, like, there's less fat people coming to get their photos done because they're told they're less worthy of getting them done.
Well, exactly. And that was like the biggest thing in my first year of business. It was really important for me to be like, look, it doesn't, like, your body can look like anything, but your story is worthy of documentation. Like, that's, if you don't go get your photo taken and like say how you want to be photographed, all we're going to see for fat bodies is headless fatties on the news. Like, that's going to be our historical representation representation going forward. And I don't want to be complicit in that. Like, no, let's see bodies doing like amazing shit in the world. Like let's rewrite our stories the way that we know them to be actually true instead of the way other people are writing them for us. And within that, I've been able to see like a lot of similar to you. Like I noticed like, well, yes, that is the one intersection that I can understand. There was a lot that I was not understanding at all these other intersections of oppression that I definitely had and have to learn a lot around. And you were somebody that I think I sent this to you in a message, but I was like you inspire me because you ask the hard questions without like, even though it might be scary for you, but you ask the hard questions that a lot of people usually would sit in silence. um does that make sense? Like
I'm
I
very willing to fuck up.
yeah, but it's like it's inspirational almost, and I don't want to say it that's what it is, but it's like when I'm like, "Oh, like, I'm thinking this thing and I don't know if it's right," like, part of me is like, "Don't say it because you're gonna get, like, trashed on the internet," and so I'm like, "Wait a minute," but if I'm asking this question, somebody else is also thinking it, right? So I think
There's always people in different stages of knowledge when it comes to intersectionalism. Like, there's nobody who knows all the answers. And, like, anyone who's pretending to or pretending, like, even as a mentor, I don't tell people I'm some sort of expert on everything. Like,
yeah.
I am a person who has like a decade of knowledge about it, which is just happens to be useful.
Well, and that's a big thing too for myself, that I've tried to make sure that I never taught anything beyond my scope of what I knew, and instead would refer to people that know better. Which is why when I was like, I want to create the Boudoir University, I was like, I can't teach all of this shit, and nor should I. Like, let me find the people that are already doing the work in these and have the experiences of existing in these experiences. Essentially, this is how they experience the world, so let them tell the stories and what can be done, right? Isn't there like a phrase like nothing for us without us, or something like that, that like a lot
Yeah,
of people use?
something along those lines.
Yeah, and that was kind of the premise of why I wanted to bring you in, as well as like Tamaya and people that were already doing the work. Why I don't know. Like, I want to learn. Like, teach me. That's why I'm like, this is just an excuse for me to fucking learn. It's like, I'll build a whole system and a whole platform just so I can learn from people. But I'm
It's
totally okay to
crazy.
do that. It's working. But yeah, so I think like, but the fact that you're so open and honest about your own, like when you do fuck up, you're like, this is what I did do, and you share that on social media, which I think is really awesome to see, because it is hard for people to admit when they recognize that they fucked up. Like, it's humbling.
I I guess I just feel obligated to tell people, like, so they don't make the same mistakes as I've made. Like, I want to avoid, I want to mitigate as much harm as I can when it comes to like doing intersectional work is mitigating harm.
Yeah.
Like, that's all it is. And it's unlearning behaviors so that you can be a more tolerable person to be around for everyone. And I say tolerable in like the nicest way possible.
Yeah, no, I know. But I think like the role modeling of it is what does it for me. Like, I love that you are willing to be like, because then that gives me a bit more courage to say when I fuck up. Do you know what I mean? Like, seeing like they did it, so I can do it too. Like, just like the same reason when we show photos of clients, right? Like, it's literally that same thing of clients of different bodies. Like, look, they did it, so you can do it too. But it's the same thing with this work of saying, I don't know everything. Here's what I do know. Here's what I'm learning and actively trying to do. So I just want to thank you for being that person in my news feed that is like, you don't have to know everything, but you also should be striving to try your best to learn everything. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. That's a good message that I'm trying to get out to everyone right now.
Yeah, you don't have to be right. You just want to try your best. And don't be ignorant. That's the other one. But yeah. So now for yourself, what are some, like you had mentioned a few of the hurdles that you've come across with your work in the photography industry, just like sharing it, not getting as much likes or accolades in the particular boudoir industry, but in the finer industry. What other areas do you find, like, I don't know, I find for people that do more than just take pretty pictures, it's almost like it's very hard to feel like we belong in this industry. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that because everybody just wants to make pretty ideal images, and artwork has always meant more than that to me. It's not about aesthetics as much as it is about the story I'm telling.
Yeah, and like those interviews that you do alongside your work, I think like the fact that you're like, here are the photos, but here is the story, right? I think the way you follow through on the sharing of the content is just as empowering, I guess would be the best way to say it. That it's not just like to show people that it's not just about the photograph, but rather the stories that created these particular photographs. So when you go in to do these particular photos for the I Woke Up Like This project, do you talk to people beforehand, or do you have a process beforehand to kind of figure out what their expectations are?
Um, the beforehand process is a lot of emailing back and forth. Like the original contact form that was on my website, like had a specific part for them to tell their story of why they're doing what they're doing, and give me like a little more details about like their trauma history and like what sets them apart as a person versus like somebody who may have not experienced all these things firsthand. Like they really had the opportunity to outline their story to me beforehand.
That's
And
good.
me knowing that story allowed me to know what questions to ask ahead of time and really do my research on their intersections of oppression and be able to relate to them a little bit more and make that session that much more comfortable for people, because comfort is like my number one focus when I'm doing these sessions, like any photo session whatsoever. Like your comfort is 110% my focus.
That's awesome. So yeah, I think doing that preparation work ahead of time is super important for that. And so I think that's something that a lot of people, like, they send out the questionnaires, or like, here, how do you want to dress, and how do you want to, like the more topical questionnaires, but I don't think people are necessarily, maybe it's equipped to or comfortable to dig into the deeper stuff. But I also think that that is the, you need to know that before, so you know, like, if I say something that could make their mood change in an instant, or do something that like is just part of my daily routine, is like how I shoot. Like, I think it's very important to that open communication, so I think that's a great thing. And that's something you offer that as part of your mentoring, is that correct? Like, you offer to share that questionnaire with people, is that?
Yeah, I have it's the interview workflow,
Mm,
body love interview workflow. It's basically a 1 hour session with me going over the process of interviewing a person that may or may not have trauma, and lightly going over intersectionalism so that you have like an intro to it when you're approaching these different interviews with your clients. And so you can stay on topic and understand where to focus your attention when you're interviewing people, and how to ask follow-up questions when they give you a really good answer to a question and you want to go a little bit further into it. So, and at the very end, you get a worksheet with all of my questions that I usually ask, like my baseline questions. Like, so you have some sort of template for yourself to like go do it on your own and actually utilize it versus, just doing this mentor session and then saying you're going to do it and then not really doing
and
it.
then, like, I don't know where to start. Yeah, that happens a lot with coaching and stuff like that, where people are like, I have all the information, but I don't really know what to do with it." So I think that's awesome that you give something tangible that's like, now you can put this into practice. Like, now go, be free, which is really cool. So yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about you now, and not necessarily the work that you do. So I want to know, can you tell me about a client who has changed your life or shifted your perspective of the information, like opened your mind to more, like, either intersectional work, or like that really just like sat with you?
Can it be a subject?
Yeah, sure.
When I first started doing photography for money and started my business, I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And I did it because I had a friend who was was teaching in Kenya and realized that her town didn't have clean water. And she needed a photographer to photograph all the water sources. So they pulled some strings and I got to go.
Wow.
But along the way, we ended up meeting this little boy who walked 5 kilometers by himself with everything that he owned on his back to ask us to scholarship him for school.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's all he wanted. He just wanted to go to school.
Yeah.
And of course we did it, but I did a photo shoot session with him, which unfortunately the photographs are forever gone. But he just knowing his story completely changed me and the way that I shoot and how I do what I do for other people, because it was undescribable to be a 16-year-old and have somebody so unfortunate come to your help and ask you, because of the country that you're from and because of the color of your skin and because you have a car with you and because you have all these privileges. And I taught him how to use a computer, and within 10 minutes he writes out a thank you note for teaching him how to use a computer.
Oh my God.
And it was just it was heartbreaking at the same time, but it was so good to figure out that like we could get him away from like his living situation, because like it turned out like his father was the town drunk, and he had several other brothers and sisters who were also struggling, and he just made the decision to just walk away from it all. So we
Wow.
stayed in contact for a long time, um, until he finished middle school and graduated from the mission and went on to school in Nairobi. So that was one of the most influential people that I've ever photographed, because it helped me realize a lot of my own privileges at the same time. It wasn't just pretty pictures. Like, these were very meaningful, like the very first photographs he's ever had of himself.
Wow.
So
That's amazing, especially at such a young age. I think it's important to have those kind of like eye-opening and brain-opening experiences, to recognize that, But you also had to have some level of self-awareness at that age to say, "Ugh, that feels different," and not just see it like,
right.
yeah. So I think that's really interesting too, that like stuck with you so much that it literally changed the way that you shoot and the way that you do the things that you do. And now look at all the like work that you're doing, which is amazing. So I want to know, is there a mantra or phrase that you use, and it maybe has changed over time, but like when you are like stuck, or like when you're frustrated, or when you feel like kind of at the end of your rope kind of thing, like what is a mantra or phrase that gets you going again?
I have two,
Okay.
um, because I've been there a lot, and I feel that way a lot. I get stuck and overwhelmed very easily with all of the disabilities that I am living with, and one of the most beneficial things someone ever taught me was the phrase "start where you stand," and it's very simple, but it can apply to so many different things. Like, if you're standing in a messy room, you just start where you stand. Just pick up what's around you. Don't focus on the entire mess at once. Just spot to spot, do what you can. And my second one is the fuck it coping mechanism.
Okay, what's that? I like the sound of this.
It's something me and my therapist developed over the course of the years that we've been together. And it's basically like when everything is at your wit's end and you have nothing else you can possibly do, you just admit it and you go, fuck it. And like, then you do what you gotta do.
That's like digging the heels in kind of thing. The grit. That's what I like, where you're like, you know what? That's it. Yeah, that's
I just like lean into my anger a little bit and let myself have it.
yeah, well, and that I think too, like anger that way, like when you get that far, is like anger is a great motivational tool to be like, you know what? No, we're not done here yet. We got shit to do.
Um,
um,
I got a lot of anger in me, and it is like 90% of my passion is fueled by my anger.
there you go. Well, you know what? Change happens as a result of that. So, as much as I don't want you to feel angry, it is helping in some capacity. So there is good of that, I
It's
guess.
holding its weight.
There you go. It's making it kind of worth it, maybe. But also, I don't want you to feel angry. But also, yeah. So yeah, so as somebody that does exist, like you exist at your own intersections of oppression, like you said, you exist with like a lot of different disabilities, and yeah, and so on. So tell me a little bit. Oh, and trans. You said, is it agender? I don't want to say it wrong.
Yes.
Agender. So yeah, so what has that been like running a business as somebody that exists at all these different intersections compared to what we see and like hustle culture and like as a business owner, we're like, oh, if you're not hustling hard enough, it's your own fault, and like all this kind of stuff. Like, how does that feel as somebody that does exist at these different intersections?
Not good. It doesn't feel good to see everybody measuring your worth based off your bottom line. The amount of classism that exists within our community is outstanding. Uh, I like to advocate for taking on as much work as you can without overworking yourself and building something slowly but surely versus like taking on $100,000 worth of sessions in a year and working every single weekend. I can't do that. With my disabilities, I can only work part-time.
Yeah.
So my full-time is part-time. And people don't understand that. When I tell them I'm part-time, they assume I'm not really a business. They don't think that I'm doing this for the bread. They think I'm doing it just for funsies. And it's not been that way for me. Like before I became physically disabled, I was working full-time and I was doing that hustle life. And you know what? It wasn't good for me. And
No.
it didn't help me grow any more than, you know, spending the time and investing in the right educational resources and really like trying to get into the community and making friends versus trying to make the most money. Well, we all want to make the most money, and I totally understand. I'm not saying I like being part-time employed. Like it's a struggle to afford living full-time on a part-time ability.
Yeah.
And it's hard because as a mentor, people will come to me because for business things and they'll think I'm less talented than other business owners because I don't make as much money. And it's not really about talent for some people. It's about, you know, what, you know, your class level is going into business. Someone who has the equity to pay multiple employees throughout the year and pay for marketing in order to get the inquiries to keep and pay for your studio all year long, plus paying for the upkeep of your studio and you know, building your business takes another stream of revenue. And when you're me, I don't have another stream of revenue because I'm not able-bodied, and a lot of that doesn't translate over to people when they look at me. They think, oh, you're only making X amount per sale. You must not be. You must not be.
Well, that's one. one of the things that from the very beginning I always was like, I am not like, well, I don't have any disabilities or things like that to contend with. I also am not pulling in the big, like, yeah, I don't even know how much people make, like, ridiculous amounts of money, and like that's great. I love that for them. That's what but like 1 year I was making like significantly large amounts of money, and I that was the year I hated my life. I don't remember anything. I don't remember my clients. Maybe I made a difference. I don't fucking know. I wasn't having fun doing it. I can tell you that much, because I lost sight because of what I thought as a boudoir photographer you had to do. And so I think that's one of the things, like, with the Boudoir University, the whole intent is like, yeah, that's great. Like, there's people teaching pricing and things like that. But I'm like, let's teach you how to be an empathetic human. Like, let's start with empathy, and like, what work are you doing that is for you as a human before you're a photographer? Like, let's get your human under control. So that way it's like you make as much as you need to make to live and do the things that you want to do, but you also enjoy the process. I think that's really important. So, but yeah, like, I just like, if I'm feeling the pressure of like, you're not making enough money and you need to be charging more and doing all this stuff, then as somebody that exists at different intersections, I can imagine that it would be that much more compounded and make you feel not so great. And
Yeah.
like, and like, yeah, and that's the thing with like, well, I like Facebook groups because I have one. I like it. Great. Love it. For community building, I also think they can become very toxic and not super great for people to listen to their inner compass, I think is the best thing. And so I think like you do a really good job of staying focused on who you're working for and why you're working and the intent behind it. And I think that's really awesome, that you're doing that. So yeah. So is there anything? We'll wrap up here shortly. But is there anything that you would like to share with my very small but awesome community?
Um, just listen to marginalized people.
What? One more time? They just kind of cut out a little bit.
Listen to marginalized people.
Ah, yes, that is a big one. We had an incident in my group, and as it was you that posted the thing, about paying black trans people to model, right? Was that what it was? I think that was that was
Trans or black trans people. Like,
yeah, but basically anybody that is like oppressed, different, like, yeah, basically you should be, let's just be clear, we should be paying people to model for us in general. It is a job and it is time, and they don't just need a bajillion photos all the time.
they're
I
a
think,
model. They can get photos anywhere, even if you're the best photographer there is.
yeah.
Like, I understand some people want to trade for print, but like saying, "Oh, I charge thousands for my services, and I would never shoot someone for money. I would never pay anyone."
Yeah,
Oh God, come
it's like,
on, man.
give them the option then. Say, here, I can give you $1,000 worth of photos, or I'll give you $1,000. Which one do you think they'll choose? And I think like that post was really awesome, and yeah, and it was hard for people to listen to marginalized folks on that post, but it did a good job of weeding out the assholes in the group, so I was
Oh
happy to get
yeah,
rid of
we
them.
got rid of a lot of people.
I was
It's
like, I think in Facebook it's like quarterly this has to happen, like, so if you want to drop that again in like
I'll do that
3 months,
again.
yeah, just drop it again. We'll use it as like our thing to get rid of
The
people.
bigot cleanse.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The New Year's coming. It's cleanse season anyway, so we might as well start it off that way. That's the only thing, people, you should be cleansing next year. Okay, let's be clear, is cleansing the bigots from your life. Thank you. And on that note, we will end this podcast. So I will post all of Ez's information in the podcast description, so that way you can go follow follow them and love all the photos because they're all amazing, and all that good stuff. And stay tuned because Ez is doing again not just one but two courses for the Boudoir University, and maybe more in the future. But we're starting with two. We'll start with the seven pillars first, and then go from there. But thank you so much for being here, Ez, and it's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye. There we go. It just